counselors. So let's get a motion out on the table. Council President.
I move to appoint Claire Surratt as interim city councilor representing Ward 7 for the remainder of Councilor Andre Ortiz's current term.
I second the motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. 7 in favor, none in favor, and none in opposition. It passes. All right. Now, I believe move from happiness to swearing her in and having her come sit at the table.
Hit the ground running.
Well, this is quick here. Oh, wow. Wow. All right.
Okay, would you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I state your name.
I, Claire Surratt,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and of the State of Oregon,
and of the State of Oregon,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
faithfully perform the duties of Eugene City Councilor
faithfully perform the duties of Eugene City Councilor
during my continuance therein.
during my continuance therein.
So help me God.
So help me God. Congratulations. Thank you.
Claire, are you going to sit over here at this
Yes.
seat over here?
Welcome.
Sign this and then...
Thank you.
Welcome, young lady. I was going to do that.
Use your budget committee name tag at the time.
This doesn't mean you're off the Sustainability Commission.
Yeah, she just didn't want to leave the budget committee.
Yeah. And you're still on the budget committee.
I'm going to welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thrilled to be
Buzz
here.
on, go right to work here.
Okay.
So I'm going to adjourn the meeting of the Eugene City Council and convene a meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency. And we're going to be discussing the deposition of real property. Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be able to present another land sale opportunity downtown for you to consider. One of the primary reasons the City and Urban Renewal Agency purchase and hold land is to be able to create or respond to emerging opportunities. Over the last 4 years and longer, the Council and staff have worked hard to lay the foundation for an opportunity like this one. Starting with Eugene Counts, you set clear outcomes to increase downtown development, promote strategic job creation, and support local businesses. You also stated a desire to increase the sense of safety downtown and the visibility and accessibility of police. Since defining those outcomes, we have invested in additional police and have actively programmed events and activities to attract families and downtown tenants. You developed a regional economic prosperity plan that aims to create jobs and increase wages and support local businesses. We have actively worked on those goals and have partnered on public and private projects that have generated over $180 million in investments in the downtown. All of this work is wrapped into the 20-year vision we have created with Envision Eugene. In the community conversations that led to the pillars of the plan, we heard a strong desire to maximize our core commercial areas, such as downtown and our key transit corridors, in order to meet our future commercial job needs. In fact, our 20-year vision aims to contain all of our commercial growth within our existing urban growth boundary. Meeting that goal will require the city to help create and facilitate opportunities. I believe this opportunity meets all of the outcomes that you have prioritized. Because of the work we have done collectively, it makes sense that a company like Northwest Community Credit Union and their members would want to join the downtown community. I'm going to turn it over to Denny Bro to go through some of the details, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to just start with a brief overview of the proposed project and then quickly cover the major purchase and sale terms that you're being asked to consider today. I think we have an image on the computers over there. Yeah, the property that's being considered for sale to Northwest Community Credit Union today is a remnant 1.89 parcel that we acquired, that was acquired by the Urban Renewal Agency back in 2001. And of course, it was part of our consolidation of property for the federal courthouse project. The credit union has been considering potential sites for a new headquarter building, and they refer to this as their main service center, because the primary function of this building would be to service the various retail branches that they have located throughout Oregon. We've been working with the credit union for a couple of months. Until recently, they've requested that those discussions remain confidential, and we've honored that request to the greatest extent possible. The credit union has discussed their timeline for the project, and they've indicated a firm commitment to meet an aggressive timeline. They have a strong desire to start construction this coming spring, which is aggressive yet very exciting with the prospect of something actually could start construction that quickly. Working backwards from that objective, it's really critical for them to have a site under control and under contract at this point in time in order for them to meet this aggressive timeline. And this is really the primary reason why they've requested consideration of the sale today. I'll go to the next. There is an image that's about to appear. And this is really an image that we've received from the credit union. It's very preliminary. It's simply a massing diagram which really depicts how their proposed project might fit onto this site. Of course, it's very important for us to recognize that this is not a building design proposal. Simply, this is just kind of an initial square block massing that architects typically do in the early stages of project, just to really determine how a building fits on the site and how it fits within the context of the neighborhood and the adjacent structures. The credit union is proposing construction of a new building of approximately 60,000 square feet. The primary use would be, again, a service center, office use, but they would also have a ground floor retail use. That would likely be on the corner of 8th and Ferry. The initial employment at this facility is expected to be 150, which is basically our understanding of what is now at the Gateway Springfield facility that they have. And really, they're looking for a place to grow. And they expect to reach 200 employees over the next few years based on this expansion plan. And of course, they have a long-term goal as well of continued growth and future expansion. And one of the things that attracts them to this site, it does have future expansion possibilities because it is a relatively large site. Just a quick review of the proposed terms, and all of these are included in Attachment B in your packet. The first are the two direct financial considerations that we're looking at. The first being the purchase price at $1.235 million, and the second being a proposal that the Urban Renewal Agency would pay the SDCs, which we're roughly estimating at approximately $200,000. Regarding the purchase price, which equates to about $15 a square foot, we've looked at various appraisals of downtown properties that have been done over the past few years. They all use a collection of comparable sales as a basis for determining market value, so we've looked at those comparable sales. We've really seen a kind of a per square foot sales range of about anywhere between $16 a square foot up to $30 a square foot, kind of in the downtown area. The most recent property that we have marketed for sale was the property on Franklin Boulevard between downtown and the university. We did an appraisal on that property, which came in at $22 a square foot. It was marketed for about a year, and in January, the council reviewed and approved a sale price of $17 a square foot for that particular property. There's also an adjacent parcel on Franklin that Peace Health owned next to that property that sold for $16 a square foot. And although it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison when we look at these properties because of size, location, etc., really the offer that we're considering today does reflect at least other recent offers on nearby properties. We've owned this property for 11 years. We haven't actively marketed this property, but it is a known large city-owned vacant site. And we frequently have contacts with developers that come through downtown looking for downtown development sites. And this is a property that we always highlight when we talk to various folks about development sites. However, we've really never received during that period of time any serious interest in this site. So even if we assume that the market value could be higher for this site, we really have no indication that there's a buyer ready to purchase this property at a higher price at this time. And especially if you look at the last 20 years, there really has been no privately developed large properties in this riverfront area over that time period. So with all of that said, there are really several ways to look at the price issue. For example, if we start with an assumption that the market value may be in the $17 to $22 range, and the gap that exists between our $15 offer and that value would be the Urban Renewal Agency's investment in this project, basically. Then the combination of that investment and the investment that we've been asked to make in relation to the SDC payments really would represent less than 10% of the overall investment that the credit union is making in this project. And as a percentage, that's much less than the investments that have been made in other projects downtown. For example, the Broadway Commerce Center, the Woolworth Building, the LCC project. The LCC project, for example, their Urban Renewal Agency's contribution towards that project really represents about 17% of the overall project. We granted the property to them at basically $1, and we also invested $8 million in that project. The Broadway Commerce Center is another example. That investment that we made really represents a majority of funding that went into that project. Almost 92% of the financing that was provided for that project was provided by the agency. And we accepted a significant level of risk associated with the tenanting of that building in that scenario. In the case of the credit union project, they're a solid owner, user, and the return on our investment is generally known going into the project, so that really makes it different than some of these other projects. We're currently witnessing a positive momentum downtown that has resulted from the investments that we've made. And really the support that's proposed for the credit union, we're hoping will create the same kind of a momentum that we've experienced downtown. So moving on to some of the other terms just quickly, they've requested a 90-day due diligence period to conduct their environmental investigation, do their feasibility work. That would begin when they sign a purchase and sale agreement, and they would be required to make a $50,000 earnest money deposit upon the signing of a purchase and sale agreement. We would have the property closed no later than April 1st, and the construction must begin, per our agreement, no later than December 31st of next year, but we expect them to want to begin construction well before that time. And then, of course, if they don't meet that timeline, we would have a repurchase agreement embedded in our agreement that would allow us to repurchase the property if the project doesn't move forward. Regarding the project design and the scope of the project, we'll require them, of course, to build consistent with what they have proposed, which is the 50,000 square foot multi-story support center with a retail branch, with a building that's oriented towards 8th Avenue. And we've also conditioned that the city staff would be allowed to provide input throughout the design process. This is an important consideration for us, and that we would be able to review final design concept prior to their submitting for permits. And really the objective is to verify that the project meets the Great Street and return to the river goals that we have in the downtown plan. There are two existing conditions on the property that will need to be addressed. One is the garden property, or the garden use of the property, and the U of O has indicated that they intend to discontinue the garden on the site, consistent with the terms of our intergovernmental agreement, which ends in February. And if the sale of the property is approved, we would begin working with the U of O in the near future to really work on a transition plan for the garden. Secondly, the AgriPac office building, which has some historic value, which is on the corner of 8th and Ferry. And it is also an existing condition. And if the sale of the property is approved, we would continue working on a feasibility plan for moving that building, and we'd look at potential options for a relocation site for that property, which would be an Urban Renewal Agency responsibility. The credit union has also conditioned the closing of the sale on the city's approval of a drive-through teller on the property. Currently, there's a zoning overlay that prohibits that use, and this is one of a handful of Envision Eugene implementation regulatory barriers that we've already identified, and that we expect to have code amendments for council consideration sometime around the first of the year or after the first of the year. There are a few other considerations which were important to the credit union, the granting of approval of curb cuts. They would like to work with them on a solution for on-street parking in front of the retail branch, which we're committed to do. They've also expressed an overall interest in 8th Avenue, particularly a better way to connect their site with downtown, and more specifically the option of making 8th Avenue two-way traffic in the future. And at this point, we've indicated that we intend to conduct a study sometime in the future to that effect. And finally, they would like us to work with them to determine that all the required utility extensions, et cetera, in the right-of-way are available. And at this point, we have no reason to believe that the level of utilities that's available are not satisfactory. So the staff recommendation is to authorize the agency director to sell the property to the Northwest Community Credit Union consistent with the terms that you have in attachment A in your packet.
Thank you. George?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to make a motion right now, and I will speak to the motion if I get a second. I move to postpone discussion on the Urban Renewal Agency's disposition of real property to a work session November 7th, Wednesday. That would be next week.
Second.
Thank you. This is totally improper and totally uncalled for. I mean, you know, we got the information online. I read my computer at 6 o'clock last night. So I've had 18 hours, minus a few hours sleep, to go through this material. And we're supposed to vote on this and approve the whole thing and all these conditions? To have a real discussion, which we should, we're the Urban Renewal Agency, and it's our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're doing good decisions. We can't possibly do that in the 20 minutes allowed to us on the, on today's agenda. This whole meeting, other than the swearing in of the new counselor, was supposed to be devoted to Opportunity Village Eugene. This whole discussion is eating into that discussion. And this is a perfect example of I've heard counselors time and time again complain about getting information at the last minute, having to make a snap decision. This is exactly what we're doing now. There is no way we can have good deliberations in another 10 minutes, and then we vote on this. There's tremendous financial implications here. I mean, here we have a financial institution wanting a $200,000 SDC relief, a bank. I mean, is this our own little mini TARP going on here, or what? And then there's no discussion of the cost of moving the building or demolishing the existing building, but they don't want to pay for any of that. How much is that? We don't know. We need to spend more time on this. We just can't adequately discuss it today.
Your motion was to table?
I'll table till next Wednesday, yeah.
The motion to table is non-debatable.
A motion to table would need to be, but it was actually a motion to postpone to a date certain.
Okay,
and
that's a
motion
very
to
different
postpone
thing,
to a date
yeah.
certain is debatable.
Okay.
Just to point out that you do not have currently a meeting scheduled for next Wednesday, and whether we would be able to find a room for you to meet in would also be a question if it would be next Wednesday.
Okay. Betty, you're next.
Well, I'm not done.
Oh, I thought you were done.
No.
Actually, George, your time is up. They didn't set the timer up until almost,
Got one more point to make.
all right, because it's our fault. You go ahead and make
Okay.
your last point.
We're supposed to be discussing the information that the city was supposed to bring back to us today. Here's what we're supposed to be discussing right now. We're supposed to be discussing possible sites. We're supposed to be discussing legal requirements to set up a temporary transitional homeless situation. And we're supposed to be discussing what are we going to do about this winter, the egg and warming centers. This is what we're supposed to be discussing today. This can easily wait till next week. The buyer has an aggressive timeline. Hey, homeless people have an aggressive timeline too. They've been waiting a long time. They'd like a roof over their head. So we'll really be lacking in our responsibility to the city and to the taxpayers if we rush this thing through today.
Now,
Thank you.
Betty.
Also, our responsibility to the general public to have a chance to weigh in and let us know what they think about their property. We have taken forever to decide what to do about City Hall. We still haven't done that. We've taken forever to decide what to do about Opportunity Village or whatever we decide to do about the homeless situation. Those are things that are really urgent. We've left an empty space where City Hall was. We should have decided that before we moved out. We should have decided before the rains started about whatever we're going to do about transitional housing for homeless people. And then this is not something that's urgent, and it's not something we should do without waiting to see what the public thinks about it. There are a lot of things George has mentioned, some of them that we need to, a lot of aspects of this that we need to think about, and also to let the public think about and talk to us about. And I move to amend the motion to make it November 14th. Is that the next meeting, I think?
13th.
13th, November 13th.
I don't care about the date.
Well, we can,
Is it friendly then?
I'll take it.
we'll take, okay, because I don't think we need a special meeting. That I don't think this is urgent. And I think, I didn't know about this till I was doing something else last night. I didn't know about it till shortly before I came here. And attachment B is here on the table, but I haven't seen it before. But even more than my seeing it, I want members of the public to be able to see it and to think about it and to tell us what they think. Thank you.
George Polling?
So now we're talking, the meeting's been, now we're tentatively scheduling it for the 14th.
With a vote.
We're talking about George's motion
Yes.
for the 14th.
Okay, because I was going to say that I'm unavailable on the 7th, so I wouldn't be able to take a vote on it. But I think we've had plenty of time compared to some of the other motions that have come out about spending large sums of money buying property at 4 o'clock the morning of a meeting not too long ago. Some of this information is not new to us. Sometimes we spend a little too much time spending time on processes, and I think that this is something that we have never done. I don't recall in the 10 years I've been on the council ever opening up the discussion of selling excess city property to a public review. I think that's one reason why we are elected, is to make those type of decisions. Something that we need to do. There's, the project itself is good. We've owned this property since 2001. We haven't received a bit of tax money off that property in 11 years. Starting April 1st, 2013, if this thing goes through, the property goes on the tax rolls. There's money coming in for not only the city, the county, but for the schools. So I think it's a good deal all around, and I think we should go ahead and move forward, and I won't support George's motion.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I respectfully disagree with my colleagues that think this is an irresponsible action. I think it's absolutely responsible, and like George, I remember a sudden motion that I didn't even have 18 hours on that involved immediately deciding to condemn property and spend a great deal more money on it than this. So certainly we have a history of deciding on important actions like this. I think that we've had 11 years, and we have had a couple of meetings already on this, and we have had access to staff and certainly their thorough work to give us detailed information and opportunity for information. And right now we're presented with an opportunity to see our downtown continue on the path of development the way we'd like to see it, development the way we'd like our downtown and riverfront to look. I'm in favor of supporting the original motion, and I'm not in favor of waiting, because what we're doing is working downtown, and I'd like us to keep it up.
Chris?
Just a real quick question. Could you tell me whether or not there is a time sensitivity to this particular issue that's being talked about?
Yeah, I mentioned the credit union's timeline, and they've made, I understand they made a corporate decision that they would like to be under construction in the spring. And again, if you work backwards from that date, I mean, what they would indicate is they're already a little bit behind schedule, and they're having to look at phasing permits and all those kinds of things that have time impacts in order to meet that schedule. So I do believe that if they're going to meet that spring target, their interest is to have that site under contract immediately.
And that a 2-week delay could present a material concern with regard to...
It presents more risk to them in regarding their ability to be under contract in a site. We know that they've looked at other sites. It may tilt the scales a little bit in the favor of another site maybe that they can move more quickly on. I know they have an interest in this site, and I know they want to move forward in this site. So they have requested consideration, and that's why we're here today, is they have some timing needs.
Thank you.
In this first round, I have Pat and then Alan.
Thank you. You know, I'm prepared to vote on this today. I think that we've received the information in plenty of time. It seems like grandstanding to be obstructionist in this one at this point. That being said, however, I have a lot to say about the positive attributes of putting a business in that particular location. And time constraints, as George Brown has noticed, prevent us from really saying that all the good things that can be said about building this property here. So if this motion does pass, then I would certainly hope that the credit union would give us a little bit of levity as far as having a more open discussion and give us a little bit of levity in not rushing a decision to not use this property if this motion does pass and we don't discuss it and pass the motion until November the 14th. I'm prepared to vote against this motion. I'm prepared to vote yes on moving forward with the property acquisition. And I think you have done due diligence. I've got a lot of great things to say about this, but I'll refrain from saying them at this point in time.
I'm just going to bring to council's attention that we wanted to be through with this particular agenda item by 12:30. I've got Alan and Claire in the queue.
Yeah, I think ideally we'd like more time. We have had several meetings on this, and staff has talked to us, I believe, individually on this topic several times. And I talked to the city manager about this in particular as well. I think it's a pretty straightforward deal. I don't think I'm going to learn much more about it. It's a good project with a high-quality owner. I like the fact that it's building on the momentum in the downtown area, and in this area in particular, there's some really fun things that are happening in that area. I don't really have a problem moving quickly on this, fairly quickly. It's not super quickly. I mean, I think we've tossed this around and known about it for a couple of weeks now.
Claire.
Yeah, so I thought I'd be the only one who was feeling like I didn't have enough information to vote. I would support George's motion. I think if it's a good idea today, it's going to be a good idea in 2 weeks. I don't think some more deep consideration of it's going to change that fact, if that's the case. I understand the credit union wants to get started, but I do think, there are questions about how this would impact the Urban Renewal Agency's balance sheet and some question about how much cost the purchaser is willing to take on. I agree with Councilor Brown about some of those questions, and I think having a more full time to do that would be beneficial.
Second round, I've got George Poling, George Brown, and Mike. So, George Poling.
Well, I was going to also speak to the project, the good qualities of the project, and why we should move forward, but I won't take up any more time.
Thank you. George Brown.
I'm not talking about the quality of the project or the integrity of Northwest Credit Union. I'm talking about fiduciary responsibility in making a rushed decision. There's so many costs here that are totally unknown that they are expecting the city to take on. I'm talking about the historic building there. We have no idea what that's going to cost. Are we going to demolish it? Are we going to move it? Oh, we'll work that out later. But we don't know how much it's going to cost. When was the last time anyone in this room went to get a bank loan? You had critical needs. You had an aggressive timeline. Guess what? The bank didn't. They checked out everything about you, your financial condition, for a good reason. They didn't want to make a bad loan. And they've been thinking about this piece of property for a long time. And I'm really tired of developers coming in, and this is a good company, don't get me wrong, and come in and say, hey, rush, we've got this schedule, we've got this schedule. They knew about this a year ago. They've been looking at this property for a long time. It's like, get in line. There's other things on our agenda. We're supposed to be talking about Opportunity Village today. This is going to go way on. This is my main objection. Are you telling me 2 weeks is so critical to the bank? That's ridiculous. They could easily wait 2 weeks. We can have a fuller discussion, get questions answered, and come to a reasonable decision. The Urban Renewal Agency has been pretty famous through the years about making snap judgments, and we've had some bad results from it. The Sears pit, for one. I don't want to end up with another Sears pit here. So it's not that time critical. It could easily go another 2 weeks. Thank you.
Mike, and then we're going to vote.
Thank you, Mayor. It's not a snap decision. We've all had plenty of information, and in my opinion, overly excessive analysis and delay is one of the reasons that Springfield has a new great big hospital. This is, as we've talked about many times, we'd like to encourage local businesses to grow here. Well, this is a local business that wants to grow here, and we have the property to accommodate it. It doesn't seem like that difficult a decision when the investment being asked of us is really more like a loan, and it's really minute in comparison to other projects we've happily considered in the same area. So I have plenty of information to make a decision today.
We're going to vote on George's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes down. Now, George, we put the main motion out?
5.
No, it's 4 and 3, right? No, 4 and 4.
Now we
Sorry.
have a full complement.
It's
Yes, we do. So it's 5
captain.
and 3. 5 in favor and 3 in opposition. It passes.
3 to 5.
It does not pass. All right. So we're ready to go to the original motion. You want to put it on the table, George?
I move to authorize the agency director to sell the parcel identified in Attachment A to Northwest Community Credit Union consistent with the terms included in Attachment B.
Second and speak.
Moved and seconded. Pat?
Thank you. It's unfortunate that we took half an hour getting to this motion. It's unfortunate we took half an hour
Agreed.
out of what was going to be a good discussion, I believe, on Opportunity Eugene. There are a couple of things I need to say about the motion now. So, this is a good project. As far as moving the existing building, it's not that difficult a task. When we built the new Jerry's store, the 300,000-foot Jerry's store, there were a lot of little houses there, which we worked with St. Vincent de Paul to move. It's a relatively easy thing, and there wasn't a place to move them immediately, so they can be stored while the final site was selected, which is now Hope Loop out on off Roosevelt Boulevard, low-income housing. So all of the issues regarding that building can be mitigated. The use itself is a very good use, and I think once again I have a lot of things that I could say about this. We don't have enough time now because of the previous motion taking as much time as it did. So I'm a yes on this. And good work, Denny. I think you've done your homework beautifully.
I'm going to call on George and Alan and Claire, but I just want to do my best to advise you to discuss the merits of the motion as opposed to the merits of each other. George.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we've not had a good discussion about this. We got an outline from staff about 2 weeks ago, so we knew the main outlines. We didn't get anything in writing. I took notes. There were no documents provided. The only documents that were provided to us yesterday. We've not had a full discussion. We don't know what the hidden and unknown costs to the city are. And 2 more weeks to have a full discussion, get a lot more questions answered is no big deal. That's passed. So I think we're really making a bad mistake here, and we're continuing some bad policies from the past.
Alan?
So this deal is very similar to other property sale deals that we've done in the recent past. So I'm familiar with the format, familiar with what's going on here. It does have a public incentive, subsidy, investment, whatever you want to call it, in the form of the SDCs and the purchase price discount and moving the building, the little historic building, stone building there. Unfortunately, we're still in that time where we need to do that to encourage investment in the downtown core area, and I consider this in that area. It's a lot more expensive to develop in this area than it is on other areas around the city. So, and so there is a subsidy that's going on here and to foster this development, but it's a lot more modest, at least, than we saw with the Beam building at 92% and the LCC at about 17 million or 17%, 18 $8 million in the Bennett building in the same ballpark. So, and we're also a tenant in that building. So we've seen a lot of these subsidies. This one's much less than that. It's not a straightforward sale without any subsidies, so that should be clear. The SDCs get paid by the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, and then, so there's no general fund subsidy, and then that amount gets recouped by the taxes that come back into it, right?
Yes.
And so there's also only a modest increase in jobs, because most of these jobs are actually a transfer over from Springfield. Is that correct? Do you know how many? Is there an increment?
Initially, they would move approximately 150, and then they expect to grow to 200. But they also have some long-term plans of maybe building a second phase as they continue to expand, so that would obviously involve some employment as well.
So no immediate increment, but potential growth. I loved the U of O garden project that was on that site for the last couple of years. Great project, thanks to Judge Aiken and so many other people that made that work. I understand budget constraints and needing to consolidate and bring it over to the urban farm. As far as the historic building is concerned, I'd really much prefer to see that moved than demolished. We do not take care of our historic buildings. I consider that a very cool building, and I'd like to see it moved. And we're not going to figure out what's going to happen to that building in the next 2 weeks. So I think that's an outlying question that's going to be there for a while. But do you have an estimate of what it would cost?
Part of the courthouse project, Pivot Architecture did an analysis of that building. The cost back then was, I think, around $260,000, so we'd expect it to be around $300,000 as an estimate. And they did conclude that probably the best future for this building was to have it moved, so they did look into the cost and the feasibility, had an engineer look at it, et cetera.
But we'd have to figure out where to put it.
Yes, their site is the next, yeah.
As far as the return to the river is concerned, I think we kind of lost that when we put the courthouse right smack in the middle of the return to the river corridor. But we do have that little walkway, as you can see there, and the way that this building, I know this is only conceptual, but I would like to see that walkway continue through there so you actually do get some semblance of the return to the river, or the ability to have that walkway go through all the way to the river, and because that area is going to be developed through the master plan. So I really like to see that happen as well, and maybe we can work with the developers to maybe push the building back. And I'll need another round, Mayor.
Time.
For one more question.
I had some specific questions. You, Denny, had said that the Urban Renewal District would absorb the difference between the $15 square foot and a higher price, such as a property nearby that I think you'd said been at 17, but you didn't give a dollar value for what that was.
Yeah, if you assume a dollar value of 17, I think the gap is like 160,000, and if you assume the $22 value, that is upwards of $500,000.
So that's an additional subsidy beyond the $200,000 approximated.
Depending on what assumptions you make in that case, yes.
And then you mentioned that you wanted to make sure that city staff had a chance to review the design and have input on that. Is that going to be in the contract we sign with them?
Yes, it would be, and I think what Councilor Zelenka pointed out regarding this path to the river is why, we would want to have some input early on so that we could express our interest in all of those goals as far as returning to the river.
Yeah, and I think an important part of that, speaking to Councilor Zelenka, is walking and biking, being able to have good walking and biking options through there. And I also, I think the garden project has been really positive, and I think the folks who've been using it, some of them are very disappointed to see this proposal. I think it would be really important to continue to try to work with the university to find another alternative site and to work with the folks who've been part of that project to identify what kind of amenities and things they would be looking for that site. And then regarding this historic building, I'm not familiar with this at all. I'm assuming, would we have had to move that regardless of who we sold this piece to?
We kind of assumed that. We left the building there knowing that there could be a possibility that someone could incorporate that in building into a future project. That's not likely, and I think that's why the study by Pivot really concluded that the building's compromised on this site because it's a single-story building next to a huge courthouse building. It also compromises development on the site because that is the primary corner, 8th and Ferry, and that is the corner you would want to build a building on. So I think we knew that was kind of an existing condition that we would have to deal with whenever we got some interest or an offer on the site.
Yeah. Great. Well, even though I had voted to extend for 2 weeks to try to get a more thorough discussion, I'm inclined to support the project. I think they would be a good addition to our downtown.
Thank you, Mayor. In a fit of creativity, George Brown and I, a couple of years ago, asked for a list of all of the city properties that were owned and whether they were surplus or underutilized, as a way of talking about potential funding for, at the time, more police officers and a couple of other things in the public safety field. And we never did get a chance to hold a work session to my satisfaction on what we might do selling those properties. But it's, as Alan brought up, something that we've done now on several occasions in the last year or two, is to sell a city surplus property. And I'm hopeful that we're going to do it again. I'm much more interested in the discussion about the proceeds now. I'd like to have a list, if I could, a memo from whoever it is appropriate to get, of the pieces of city property or buildings that we've sold in the last 2 years and the closing price, so that we might have a more thorough discussion about long-term capital and operational expenses and appropriate use of that. Thank you.
Mr. Bowling?
Well, I agree with Alan about the existing old building there. I think it should be preserved in any way that we possibly can, because we are losing a lot of our historic buildings. Alan mentioned that it would be a modest increase of jobs. Well, it's actually a substantial increase of new jobs in our downtown area by them moving from Springfield to Eugene. I don't anticipate people losing their current employment as if they were to, say, move to Portland or even out of state. And then with the increase of employment at a later time, I think this, what we as a council have been looking for the downtown is to increase the number of jobs downtown, whether it be newly created jobs or jobs from other parts of the city or county. And I know for a fact that there's an economic development professional in this area that has shown that property many times to prospective clients, but it doesn't seem to have gotten any traction. So I think that, this being the first time we've actually got somebody that's ready and willing to purchase it, I think we should go ahead and move forward with it.
I'm going to ask Betty to take her turn, then I'm going to ask for you to vote on this, so we leave 45 minutes to have our second discussion. I'm going to get you to go along with that. Betty?
I don't think we should even have been discussing this today, taking time away from the main topic. But I want to say that I don't know how I would vote against this if we waited more time, but I will vote against it today. I'm very much for subsidizing buildings in the very core of downtown. This is not in the core of downtown, and every time we subsidize something on the edges, we diminish possibilities for development in the core. So I'm voting against it mainly because it's the wrong time. And I want to say, too, that urban renewal money is money. It comes from the schools in the county and from the city's general fund. It doesn't generate itself. Thank you.
Okay, ready to vote on this? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 2. It passes. Thank you. I move on. I'm going to adjourn the meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency and reconvene a meeting of the Eugene City Council. We're going to quickly shift into the Opportunity Eugene discussion follow-up and see if we can get some work done here.
I think that's what we just did.
Okay, you ready?
Thank you, sorry. Just going to let Michael pull his PowerPoint presentation and go up and turn it over to him. Sorry.
That's good.
Mayor and Council. Returning to you today to continue our discussions related to homelessness winter strategies and the staff site analysis. At our last meeting, Council had asked staff to return to Council today to discuss proposed winter strategies and develop a list of sites for a potential homeless camp or shelter, temporary shelter. I'll start this presentation discussing winter homelessness strategies Staff met with various service providers to discuss potential strategies for the oncoming winter that would either complement or be in addition to existing resources. These ideas range in focus and cost and include the following. One would be to maintain last year's expansion of the car camping program. Last time was a one-time increase to St. Vincent's car camping management contract of $50,000. That resulted in about a 15-site gain, and the momentum picked up throughout the year as they found new hosts for the sites, including city sites. We would expect that those gains would continue if the expansion into next year for an additional $50,000 would continue of at least 17 more sites. Following our site analysis, we found more potential city sites that would work for St. Vincent de Paul too, so that momentum could keep growing. One issue that surfaced over and over again was the need for staffing in our social service agencies, as recent funding cuts have left many agencies understaffed, negatively affecting their ability to provide services and undermining their existing physical capacity. So one proposal that's come forward would be additional funding for Looking Glass's Station 7 youth shelter. That would be requested $17,000. That would serve 2 to 3 additional youth and a parent with a small child for 100 days, 100 additional days. So that would be increasing their existing capacity in a sense. Another strategy that came forward was a focus on homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. The city has a history of funding this through federal funding with the HPRP funds that came and have since expired from the federal government. Our experience with that program is that payments averaged around $700 per family and did a great job of preventing families from becoming homeless and providing stabilization, or people who recently became homeless, allowing them to jump back into housing before spending too much time out of housing. It's generally, I think, viewed as a very successful program. Shelter Care is raising private funds and has a $25,000 match grant that they'll be launching a campaign on at the beginning of this year. That is a potential avenue for more city funding, and it's an instant leverage of city and private dollars in the event that the city would want to invest funding in that. Further, there's been talk of a need for a service coordinator or a sort of triage position that would work this proposal was based at St. Vincent de Paul, but it would work as kind of a center to refer people to their appropriate services as needed to the different service agencies throughout the county. So if someone comes in, if indeed there's an opening at a service center or housing or whatever the specific need was that was germane to their needs, it would be a straight course to that. The county is also working on a service like this through their service point system, and they're actually in the middle of developing that. St. Vincent de Paul's proposal for such a position was $35,000 to create a staff for 1 year. Another proposal which came up last year and is still around is a temporary shelter facility. This provides a very basic MASH tent-like shelter to individuals identified by service agencies and the Eugene Police Department, typically the chronically homeless or most often dual diagnosed with other issues that prevent them from gaining access to our existing shelter system or social service providers. This facility would house roughly 20 individuals a night who have nowhere else to stay. The cost of this is projected at about $80,000 because it would require staffing. I know a large part of the workforce ideally would come from volunteers, but a service of this kind would require paid staff. And continuing from the some stuff that came up related to the Opportunity Eugene Task Force is a continued need for locker units. Cost estimates, at least for a prototype locker converted from shipping containers, is roughly $10,000 to start, with the idea that the cost would be cheaper once the prototype was developed. I believe we have at least a few potential hosts throughout the community for these larger units. We could host up to 40 lockers, I believe, of permanent, secure, and dry storage. I would like to take a moment to pause right here and discuss potential winter strategies. Upon discussion among council, staff would go back and research funding options for these, depending on which strategies council would like us to further research.
I want to urge council to look at these really critically and move on, give staff direction today if possible, because here we are at the end of October, coming on to November. We could be seeing Christmas come and so forth and still be having this discussion. So I'm just urging you to really make as your top priority dealing with some of the needs of folks through this winter. And I also wanted to point out to you, many of you probably saw this on television, that the mission was on the TV talking about how they are at capacity and beyond right now. And I know that Terry McDonald has also said to me that there's a crisis in terms of just basic shelter for people, especially, and I did want to ask you this, Michael, is the temporary shelter facility for cold nights, is that sort of adding to the Egan Center, or is it
specific to a specific temperature?
At any rate, the one of the situations they were talking about is that they not only don't have regular shelter capacity, but they certainly don't think they have capacity within the Egan warming centers for cold nights. So just for you to think about, I think it's a priority about how we get through this winter, and then there's the long-term discussion. But so I just urge you to move on this as soon as possible. George Poling, George Brown. You didn't? All right. I've got George Poling, Alan, and Claire.
Yeah, on the temporary shelter facility, is that what has been referred to in the past as wet beds?
It's a similar approach to wet beds. Yeah.
Okay. And then the service coordinator, I'm sorry, I kind of lost it on there a little bit. You say that St. Vincent had or has a similar type position?
They're proposing this would be a new position for St. Vincent de Paul. The Human Services Commission is working on developing a software approach where agencies could do this on their own, but that's in development, so it's a ways down.
Okay, so they're doing that on their own, and that's different than this service coordinator position that you offered here.
Yeah.
So then, once or if St. Vincent can get their program up and running, would ours need to be continued, or could we kind of mold it or meld it into the St. Vincent project, or just drop ours altogether?
And that would have to be a discussion we'd have to have with St. Vincent de Paul and the Human Services Commission.
Okay. And then if you total all these up, and I'm not that real good at math, it's roughly in the area of about $250,000. Is that for just this winter period, or some of these ongoing?
Well,
like the maintained car camping program, that's an ongoing for the entire year, not just the winter months. Is that correct?
Right. We'd have to hash the details out specifically. The temporary shelter originally proposed was just for a few months. So it doesn't open on certain nights. It'd be open for a span of time, but it wouldn't be a year-round facility. I believe all these are year-long projections except for locker units, which are a one-time expense.
In the locker units, that's just a one-time fee. Once it's up, it's kind of self-maintained. Yeah, I think they're all good projects to pursue further.
Okay, Claire.
So on the car camping program, you said that it initially was able to expand to 15 sites. Do you have an idea of how many people that served?
15 additional sites.
Right.
Right now, I believe we're at sort of 60, including
Sort of
family.
60
Yeah,
people?
including families, yeah.
60 families?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, 60. There's 12 families, and then
Gotcha.
the balance is individuals.
And you said that it's got potential to expand, that there are possibly more sites that have been identified.
Yeah.
And then that $50,000 would be to fund those for a year? Is that what you were saying?
Exactly.
And same with the additional Station 7 capacity, that 17 grand is for a year?
100 days.
Oh, 100 days, thank you. And then you mentioned shelter care is looking at a matching grant, but you said that wouldn't be available to the beginning of next year.
They're beginning their campaign at the beginning of next year. So what they have is they have a $25,000 match waiting, and they'll be launching the campaign based on that. So this would be a match to the match they've been promised for that campaign.
But it's funding that wouldn't kick in maybe till January.
As far as I understand it, yes.
And then the temporary shelter facility, I was still a little confused about that. That's to serve approximately 20 people who have challenges staying in other places, and it would be for the winter time specifically,
Winter through spring.
triggered by a temperature situation like Egan.
No, it would not be triggered by temperature. It'd be for a block of months.
Gotcha.
Typically winter through the spring, yes.
And then approximately how many locker units could be converted with that 10 grand?
I believe the prototype was around 40 units. It was, I think, 40 to 50. And then the idea is that, developing a prototype is the more expensive one. And they'd increase their efficiencies of developing them after that, so a second one would be cheaper, a third one may be cheaper than that. But this is for kind of the research and development of the
Gotcha.
locker unit. Yeah.
And those would be specifically for storing belongings?
Yes.
Thanks, those are my questions.
Alan? And then Pat and then Chris.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I've been working on homeless issues for almost 20 years, it seems, and there's always been a critical need, but I think it's especially true since the recession has hit us, and it often feels like we're doing 2 steps forward and 1 step back when we're dealing with these. And there's always been a critical need for this service, and I've always been supportive of it. I think each of these proposals is a good one, and I'm supportive of all of them. Where do we have a location for the temporary shelter facility and the locker units?
We would have to cite a temporary shelter facility. We do not have one in mind as of this moment. Locker units, I don't have any signed agreements from anyone, but I have had people express interest with me that they have the room for it.
At an existing facility?
Yeah.
The temporary shelter probably be a new location?
Yeah.
Different, that's not currently serving people, okay. So, I didn't add up, what's the total if you add all these up?
202.
50,000.
How much?
202.
202?
202.
And I would support the rapid rehousing at the higher end of that, so it's probably a little more than that. Where does all this money come from?
Our plan was that we wanted to get a sense of if you wanted to pursue 3 of these, 6 of these, and we'll come back probably at your very next meeting with funding strategies of where you might find the dollars to do this. We wanted to get a sense if you were going to say, let's look for $100,000 or $200,000 or $50,000.
Okay. I'm supportive of all.
Thank you, Merritt. As we look at this list, there's nothing here that's really new. It's more addendums to existing services other than the temporary shelter facility. It's more or less a mirroring of something we're already doing in a different location. The locker units, that's the only thing that's really new. Everything else is more or less an adjunct to something that's already going on. That is to say, we're leveraging what's an existing function in the community. And I think it's pretty good leverage of the dollars that we have considering the amount of need in the community for people who are facing a long winter of cold. It's temperature non-specific, but it gets pretty specific at night when you're out in it. I think once again, it is all things that we're already doing for the most part. And a mention regarding what the Human Services Commission is doing on the service coordinator and maximizing the amount of money and the amount of effort that's being placed into the broad range of services that have been presented in the community. The Human Services Commission is looking at making sure that things are identifiable on a immediate basis when people need it. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's something that's going to take some work at the HSC level and with all of the agencies and all of the governments involved in the HSC. But like Councillor Pauling, I'm in favor of this. I think all 6 projects should be looked at, and I would like to suggest that we begin finding a funding source for $202,000 to move forward with all 6 projects.
Chris.
I get 217.
Thank you. Appreciate the work that's done, and like the mayor, I agree. We have to come up with a cold weather winter solution, and I appreciate the work that's been done because I think it really does move in that direction. And I'm just reminding myself that we are talking about 2 parallel tracks. We are talking about the Opportunity Village as a conversation. This is the parallel track to that, which is a set of systems that operate within a lot of the tried and true strategies that have already been offered that we've all worked on for a long time. And that's particularly appealing to me because it's building on strategies that have been working, that have a demonstrated track record, and that are operated by people that are experienced and knowledgeable about what they're doing. And like others here, I like all of the options. I would point also, in particular, as others have, to the homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing option, because the best way to prevent homelessness is to not become homeless in the first place. And rapid rehousing, rental assistance, and those kinds of things can represent a small amount of money that can really do a lot to keep people in their homes. And so what you want to do is to find a system that works within the existing structure. People on site, in homes, having a challenge, need some help, or they've just come out and some way to get them back in is a real structural way to benefit those kinds of issues. So I very much support the prevention and rapid rehousing options. I think those are really good. The car camping program, I think it can really absorb a lot of additional capacity, so I like the ability to work on that. Plus, it allows the siting in a variety of different areas around town, which is another, I think, important aspect of what we're talking about. The one that is probably the most challenging for me is the MASH tent, simply because it creates a place where we're starting to segregate people who are quote-unquote undesirable. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to create a segregated group of undesirable people. I don't think that's where we want to go. I want to help people, and I want to be as thoughtful with people as we can be, but not by concentrating them into some place where we're just putting them to deal with it. And I understand the needs, and I can support doing it because of the difficulty of the situation we're in right now. But it's not my preferred path. It's not the way I would like to have to deal with this. I think the locker units and day use options are great. I visited some of them in Portland. They're well used. I think they're very effective, and so I'm very supportive of that idea. And if a service coordinator or somebody like that can help us with making sure people are being channeled into the right solutions, I think that's a very important aspect as well. We need to have case management, but for me, in order to provide a structural solution, it really has to be built around an employment infrastructure as well. People need jobs. That's where success comes from. Don't just find them a place to live. Let's continue to work with them so they can find jobs and become upwardly mobile.
George?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I like all of these. I agree with Councilor Pryor about the undesirability of segregating people. I think they really need to be integrated in a kind of a housing first type of strategy. However, the need is so great. I think this is okay for this winter. I mean, you know, and the other strategy where you actually integrate people into the community and you spread them around and you find good places and then follow up with them all the time. That's the ideal way, but the time is so short here and the need is so great that I was be very supportive of that. It's a roof over, someone said. People need that. So, yeah, and I like the idea of about $225,000, so we can come up with that. I've got a question. Is there any money left over from last year's, the money that was earmarked for Occupy Eugene, Washington, Jefferson encampment?
I know the money was reallocated, but
Well, I think you made some decisions around the Occupy dollars as part of last year's budget piece. So there's no dollars left in that. There's some that's still going to Buckley House that you had sort of temporarily taken away, and we've refunded it back into Buckley.
Okay, right, thanks.
Under homelessness prevention, which I think is one of the most important things that we could do, are we asking eWeb to cooperate with us?
I have not had any conversations with eWeb.
Well,
Not on this specific
the
proposal.
way a lot of people lose their homes is that they can't pay their utility bills.
Right.
And once you've been cut off, it costs a lot of money to get reconnected, and then you still have to pay all the back bills. Just going door to door in South Eugene, even I found people who told me they don't have utilities. One woman said she spent months dumping her sewage in the backyard because she didn't have, everything was cut off. And I think that that's one of the chief ways that people find themselves getting, it counts up and the eWeb bills get to be bigger and bigger, and you have the past bills and the interest for it being overdue and so forth. So I'd like to see us talk with them. I didn't hear you say anything about restrooms. That's a crucial thing, I think. I noticed that Amazon Park restrooms are open now. I'm glad to see that. Or at least the doors were open this morning. And I know that there are people sleeping there. And it's, do you have any plans for having more, is any part of this having more restrooms available for people who aren't in a shelter?
Not for winter homelessness strategies. We have done work to create maps for the downtown and in the park blocks so people can locate existing public restrooms. I've also been working with the Whitaker Community Council to help identify potential hosts for restrooms to take care of the Monroe Street Station closing. We originally had a host agree to site, but that isn't working out as quickly as we would have hoped. So we're continuing those talks with the council, Whitaker Council.
Okay. And we're still going to talk about Opportunity Village, I assume. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I don't know if you need anything more, but my sense from listening to everybody is that there seems to be a general sense that they are in agreement for you to kind of move forward on all of the strategies that you have here.
We'll bring forward some ideas for how that might be.
I don't know if they need a motion, that's what I'm asking.
No, we'll bring it back.
So I wanted to make one observation around the discussion around the temporary shelter. One of the situations we have because of our lack of programs for people with mental health issues is we have a number of homeless folks who are not allowed in some of the existing facilities because they can't manage themselves in a way that allows them to be in those facilities. And so there is no place for them to be. And I think this, it appears to me, as an effort to try to find at least something to put over somebody's head. I got a Facebook communication last week about an 88-year-old woman who's out on our homeless on our streets and essentially banned from because she can't manage her whatever it is that's affecting her. So that is a big need, and it's not an easily met need, but we have a sizable number of people who have behavioral difficulties that make it hard for them to be in the regular system as you described, but they still need to live, and they still need to be as safe as we can make them. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do something in that regard with this. The other one, I mentioned it before, and I mentioned it to Sarah this morning. I'll mention it to you. On 2nd and Polk, somebody a couple years ago built a whole lot of small storage units. And I noticed that on the front, first of all, I noticed it's very orderly. I don't see anything that looks like that's not good going on there. I think they've even got coffee machines in there now. And it looks like they have small units, really small storage units, and they have larger storage units which are shared by a number of people. And I think they're dealing a lot with the mission folks who go by there, and this is a place for them. Sometimes they hang out there, sometimes they share space and probably put their limited funds to be able to pay for a storage unit there to keep their things in. So I think that would be worth looking at what's going on there and what strategies are already in place, because I would say that one's probably got 50 or 60 bigger units and maybe, I don't know how many smaller ones across the front for storage for people. So it might be an interesting thing to see if there's something already out there that's coming from the private sector that is addressing some of the things that we're trying to address, and to see if there's some strategies to be learned from that. Everybody okay with them moving ahead with this? So now I think we're going to go into the next part of the conversation.
Madam Mayor, just a quick arithmetic clarification.
Yeah.
The 202 versus 217 was the range in item 3.
Yeah,
Right.
10 to 25,000.
We'll clarify, put a little more detail, and bring you some solutions.
And when can we expect this? You're going to bring this back soon, because
Yes.
I think this
November,
is very
I think it's November 13th, and we'll just
okay,
have a short.
very time sensitive thing. I think.
Okay, I'll move on to the site analysis portion. Staff's original look into sites returned 409 potential sites. At the time, that included parks, city-owned, and other public non-city sites. We then focused on city-owned sites, which cut the list down about 25% to 307, but still remained unwieldy. So following our discussion 2 weeks ago, staff followed council's direction to only include city-owned sites within a quarter mile or less from transit, greater than or equal to 1 acre, and to exclude parks. This reduced the list down to 17 sites. 16 sites. These sites range from 1 to 3.7 acres and have various characteristics in zoning. The location and zoning of some of these sites raises a number of issues. Staff approached this exercise as though citing a homeless shelter. A homeless shelter is defined in city code as, quote, a nonprofit or public agency providing food, temporary housing, clothing, and other support services primarily for adult transitory individuals. Still a very broad definition. Per city code, a homeless shelter is allowed in the following zones. With a conditional use permit, it would be in C4, commercial industrial, I1, light industrial, I2, medium or light to medium industrial, and PL, public land, where the public land is within 300 feet of a residentially zoned land. Allowed outright without a conditional use permit would be a public land where there's more than 300 feet to a residentially zoned parcel. Otherwise, zoning amendments would be needed for sites zoned other than these. Because of this, staff further reduced the site analysis to parcels that currently would require a conditional use permit or less. Paring down the list of these criteria, staff further reduced the list to 6 sites. And I can go into further detail about these sites. The sites are generally located in the north central part of the city. You have all 6 sites in your packets along with the original list of 16.
Does the original list be 1, 2, 3 through 6? 1, 2, 3, 6?
1 through 6, yes, it's numbered accordingly. Our first site was off of Commons Drive, near the corner of Commons Drive and South Garden Way. It's got a subzoning of public land at 1.4 acres. There's the number of households within 600 feet is 433. This is in the Harlow neighborhood in Ward 4. It would require a conditional use permit. Available utilities became a tricky question. Some of the sites have never been developed. Some have been developed. Many of the sites have adjacent utilities, so we kind of focused on if there's more detail needed from council, we go into a more in-depth analysis about what existing utilities exist on the site itself.
Could you repeat the zoning again, please?
Public land.
Okay, thank you.
And here's just more of a broader view of the area surrounding it.
How far is that from the school?
I'm not exactly sure its distance from the school.
The university?
I thought that was garden.
What is that?
I think those are apartments.
Those are apartments?
Commons Drive.
This is Commons Drive.
So those are apartments?
Those are apartments, yeah. This is closer to Autzen Stadium.
I've just got a quick question, excuse me. You're saying residences within 600 feet?
Yeah.
Why aren't you using the 300 feet?
We used, specifically Councilor Farr last time said 200 meters, so we just made it 600.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm just referring to Eugene Code 9.2683.
We wanted to give it, we didn't use it for, we didn't use the same standard for the conditional use permit standard, but it would have been a different standard anyway because conditional use permit talks about zoned parcels. We're talking about actual households. So
I see. Okay.
So we're not providing that information for regulatory reasons. We were just trying to give you a context of how many people live near
I
it.
was just wondering why the discrepancy there. Okay, thanks.
Site number 2 is adjacent to the site number 1 to the north. Same zoning, same general area. It's a fewer residences, 398 are households in the area. All the same conditions apply. It's a little bit closer to the substation immediately to the west. And here's a better picture of that site. Site number 3 was City Hall. You're all familiar with where that is. 2.6 acres zoned public land. Households within the area is 136. But since there are no nearby residentially zoned or residential zones, there's no conditional use permit required, and utilities are available.
Question. Are you assuming that we're not going to use City Hall for City Hall?
We just ran through the analysis.
No,
and
we're
there's
assuming we
existing
are going to
sites.
use it. We're assuming we are going to use it for a city hall, but you asked us to bring back the list of sites that are currently underutilized.
Fourth site is a peculiar site north of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. It's also zoned public land, 3.7 acres, relatively large. The most populated area of our sites with 824 households surrounding it. Again, in Harlow, in Ward 4. There a conditional use permit would be required. There's also a water quality and water resource sub-area. We're not exactly sure exactly what that would mean. It would just kind of change where any structures could be sited on the lot. But there are no utilities available on that site, and there's only private road access to it so far, so there's some characteristics to the site that would make it a little bit more difficult to work with. So identified North Garfield at 129 North Garfield. That's an industrially zoned plot at 2.6 acres. The least populated area at 62 households in Tradesong. It would require a conditional use permit, and utilities are adjacent to the site, and we believe there might be some actually on site from former use. This is located in North Garfield, just south of Roosevelt in the Public Works yard. There's another view of that. And finally, the sixth site was the former Naval Reserve site near 13th Avenue in Chambers. Another public land zoned lot. That's 3.1 acres. 231 households within 600 feet of the Jefferson West Side. Does require a conditional use permit again, and has utilities adjacent and probably some capacity existing on the site already. And here's a view of the area.
Was there ever any official sort of land banking thing about that particular site for future affordable housing?
There has been talk of it.
But no specific steps in that?
From what I know, I don't know the specific procedural process or the process for it right now. I know there would have to be a metro plan amendment and a few other processes that would have to take place. It has been in talks to make that a land bank site. So our next steps, we returned with funding options for the winter strategies. We are organizing a service provider panel on November 13th, where we'll be able to bring some existing service providers to council to discuss needs and gaps and best practices. We'll be meeting with them to help figure out exactly what they would choose to talk about. We do have a public hearing on November 19th for the car camping ordinance amendment, and then follow-up action would be on the 26th for that. And in our remaining time, I'd like to open it up for council for any questions.
So I think it's a great idea to have a service provider panel be here to answer questions from council, but I think it would be helpful in making sure you get what you want. This is to help in the discussion of the village discussion, and what would be helpful to you in terms of information would be good for them to know ahead of time, I think, as much as possible. So I don't know that you could come up with that now, but if you do come up with a clean now in that time, I think it would be really helpful to them to come prepared with the kind of answers that you want. I see me, Betty?
Is there public transportation available at the North Garfield site?
And they're all within a quarter mile of a transit stop. I would say yes, yeah.
And you did. George Poling?
I noticed that on site number 2, probably 4 also, couldn't tell from the photograph, site number 1, number 2, and possibly number 4, directly under BPA lines. Do we have any information on EMFs, the electromagnetic field, the emissions from those, and the health hazards involved?
Not at this point. That would be something we would do if we were to do a more focused analysis on these sites and talk with eWeb. We would have to talk with eWeb about a number of issues also.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I know that Councilor Clark has raised the issue before, and maybe this is one of the questions that can be brought to the service provider panel as far as, and our staff work on it also, is some of the legal issues, the liability that the city is looking at by establishing this, also the funding mechanisms that are in place, who's going to pay for the utilities, water, electricity, sewer, garbage, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some of the questions that I know that Councilor Clark and I both need to get answers to before we go any further with it.
Okay, George Brown?
Thanks, Mayor. Well, yes, George, Councilor Poling, I agree. And as a matter of fact, if you remember 2 weeks ago, there were 2 motions. One was to provide a list of sites, and we honed that down. And the second motion was to come back with legal requirements, a review of legally what we have to do to make this happen. And so I'm wondering, I noticed it's not on the agenda today, but we did make a motion for that, to have that information today's meeting.
Well, we did focus
I'm just wondering what happened to that
legal requirement of a conditional use permit, which would be the one step. And once again, these are site-specific. So the outstanding legal issue right now would be which ones need a conditional use permit. We thought we made that easier by skipping the ones that would need a zoning amendment. And then site-specific, legal issues, regulatory issues arise with each site depending on their current characteristics. If we were to have a better idea of what specific site we were looking at, we could hone in more specifically on the legal issues per site.
Well, we need to know the range of legal issues. That's what we asked for. I mean, I can read them. Here's the motion. I move to direct the city manager to return on October 31st with an explanation of the legal requirements for establishing a pilot program for unhoused families with children as referenced in motion number 1. The information should address state and local ordinances, codes, zoning laws, and all other legal requirements. That motion passed, I don't know, 6-2, 7-1, I forget exactly. And I was a little surprised not to see anything in there, in the AAS today, because we got the other information here at the meeting. We got nothing on that, last Thursday in our packet. So the information that we've received, to my view, is insufficient, and you didn't fulfill I don't believe that you really fulfilled what we required in the motion.
Right, 2 weeks ago when you introduced those motions, I felt like what I had tried to clarify at the table is we would be able to hone the sites down based on what you kind of specified by the acre and parks, and that we would be able to start talking about what requirements would be needed to kind of move in that direction. I hope that I didn't give the impression in the 2 weeks ago that we would have a full code and building permit analysis on each one of these sites, because we didn't know at that time if we had 5, 10, or 50 or 100 sites still. So the intent was to go through all of it, narrow it down to a handful you could talk about, and then we can certainly provide information on what it'll take to take any one of these sites and make it for residential use. The second piece that's difficult is getting an understanding if we get agreement that it's you want to do a camping site for families, that'll have different legal requirements than a village site for individuals, whether it's in tents or buildings, so they're all different. We've acquired a ton of information. It's just trying to figure out how to deliver it to you.
Well, motion number one specifically referenced adults with their accompanying children.
Right.
So that right there narrows it down. You hone in. And so, and we're down to what, 6 sites? 6 attractive sites. So we need to know what that means. I mean, it's one thing to have it off on the list of the graph rather than, a few paragraphs discussion. I have copies of the ORS, allowing 2 tent cities in a municipality, and I have copies of the city code, and I have some of the zoning stuff. We've already assembled all that. But specifically, we're asked, what are the legal requirements of setting up a situation as referenced in motion 1? And I don't see any analysis of that today, so we still need to do that. And obviously, we're going to need another work session on this, because I believe that in some of the councilors are still unclear about what's being proposed here. I just gathered from some of the comments at our last meeting and today. And so this service provider panel, this will include the OVE people. They're the ones who are proposing to be responsible for a site like this.
Right, well, we had proposed several weeks ago, we're just moving forward with what we felt like was the work plan you approved several weeks ago, was that we would bring in some of our service providers that currently house the homeless as a part of a panel conversation to try to give you an opportunity to ask more questions if you needed to. So we've just been working towards trying to pull that together.
Yes, I'll need another round.
So my comment about this is I think there are some legal questions about that, and I would need Glenn to clarify this, or someone, that if you decided that you wanted to locate a camp on a piece of property, when you let someone else use that property, do they assume all the liabilities? That's one of the questions, because as I look at it, if you should do that, then you would want to build into the RFP or whatever who assumes what responsibilities for what, and I think that would be part of that conversation at that time, and maybe Glenn can sort of clarify that for you don't have to do it now, Glenn, but I think it's in that general range. Do we divest ourselves of that responsibility when we lease it to somebody, and what is ours, and that kind of question. Claire.
Well, I appreciate you bringing these sites to the council. I know you've been working on that, and I have a question that you might not be able to answer today, but on the North Garfield site, is there any concern, because it is an industrial area, about hazardous materials or anything that remains on the site from prior usage? So that would be something I'd want to look at for that particular site. We wouldn't want, a FEMA trailer situation there. And so I'm hoping from this conversation that the intention is that you might do some of this legal analysis on these 6 proposed sites and give us what the concerns might be with each of them. You've mentioned a couple of them in passing, but I think a memo with that information would be really helpful. And it's also unclear to me whether or not the folks who are creating the Opportunity Village concept have had a chance to present that in any full way to the council, and I don't know if there's a methodology for us to do that. I think that would be probably helpful to clear up some of the misconceptions or the concerns, and perhaps they could be included on the service provider panel as an addendum, understanding they are not currently a service provider.
So Claire, and then I've got Alan in the queue, and then George again, and we're out of time. I just want to say that this has been sort of a chicken and egg discussion for quite a while, which is nobody wants to necessarily look at a specific proposal until they decide that they want to actually do a site, and how do they get to the point where they want to make a decision about whether they want to do a site. So we are sort of keep circling around that to narrow in without without people feeling like they've signed up for something that they haven't actually signed up for yet. So that is the challenge I think we've been facing for quite a while here. Alan and then George.
Do you want a motion to extend the meeting? Motion to extend the meeting 10 minutes.
Second?
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in opposition? 1. It passes.
Another meeting and also an appointment.
Okay.
So I think this is good that we're moving forward. I'd like to see us move faster if we could. I think all 6 sites look promising. Good work on getting us down to that, and thank you for doing that. Not an easy task, but that makes it much more concrete for me anyway, and I think most of the community. These next 3 steps are great. I'm very supportive of the provider panel. I hope that one of the providers on the panel will be a representative from Opportunity Village Eugene, OVE, somebody from their board. The question I have relates to the next steps on the site analysis. And I'm anxious to move forward on that. That's not up here. So many issues that have been brought up, legal issues, liability issues, further work on the site analysis, environmental issues, programmatic and governance issues, cost, public input. And so I'm kind of wondering how this fits into the timeline of all this. We're doing this moving forward, but I don't want to stop what we're doing on the site analysis to do that and then come back to this. I think they should be going along in parallel tracks. So I'm wondering what the timeline is for moving forward with the site analysis and all those different items that I just mentioned.
What we were anticipating today was that you would either say, yeah, these 6 are the ones we want to sort of move forward with on more information and possibilities, or no, we want to look at all 16, or we want to look at a couple of private sites, and that we'll continue to find work sessions. We can provide some of the information that you're asking for in a memo form in between now and then around legal issues, liability issues. On 6 sites, that's a doable amount of work. And we'll find another time to kind of keep sorting through.
Mayor, do you want a motion to move on the 6 sites?
Well, I guess
for the analysis,
I want to be, I don't know if do you need a motion to do that?
I don't think so. I mean, if it's in general
My only
agreement.
concern is, do you want all 6 of those sites?
I want to see all 6 move forward.
So you want to see the City Hall site?
City Hall?
Sure.
Really?
I'd like to see it. I won't probably agree with it, but I want to see it.
We'll include the concerns and issues with each of those, because it's not, the City Hall is a future development site. So is the 129 Garfield site. There's plans for that, and I don't know how soon they are, and so we'll vet all of that for you.
The only reason I ask that question is because if you're going to ask them to go detail something, and you know something on the list is probably not going to be something that you're ever going to be interested in, now's the time to surface that so they don't have to spend a lot of time doing a faux analysis for you. So that is just what I'm suggesting that you consider. On the other hand, I'm perfectly fine if you want all of them detailed. That is fine too. Yes, Betty?
I move that we remove City Hall from the list.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to remove City Hall from this list. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In opposition, 2. It passes. So now you're down to 5 sites. Yes, Drew.
Madam Mayor, in all good consciousness, I can't move forward to sites that have the electrical lines overhead without knowing first what the impact is going to be. I think we can do that type of analysis before we decide to move forward. I mean, maybe we should leave it open to 16 sites, because if we can get the information back on the environmental impacts, also you mentioned something about the water quality. If those issues kick those sites out, what are we stuck with? One, and that would be the one that is on Garfield, and we have some questions about that. So I don't think we should limit it to just the 6.
I would think, I'm just not, that what part of their analysis would be to tell you which ones had tenable conditions for using for this situation, but that doesn't deal with your wanting to have more openness about the number.
I was hoping that that would be the type of information that they came back with this limited number of sites, is do a preliminary scope of the land to see if there are issues that we can't overcome, such as the environmental and health issues that I've raised.
So is what you're suggesting, George, that there be, before you get to a deep analysis, that there be sort of a scoping level first? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think that the staff is talented enough that they can identify the main issues surrounding each of the sites, and, you know, the main concerns that would prevent it from moving forward, and look into those and come back with us and say, Site X is got this object that we can't get over. And if it's the water quality, or if it's the overhead electric lines, or, you know, too close to too many homes, whatever the case may be, before we decide to move them forward. I thought that was what we were going, the information we were going to get beforehand.
Kind of a fatal flaw analysis.
But do you want to create another step before you go to the deep analysis thing for a sort of a more scoping analysis? Yes.
I would think that the staff, when they're doing the 5-site analysis, that the first thing they would do is do a fatal flaw analysis that says, is there anything that's going to kick this out? And if there is, then they would just say that and then move on to the next one.
And I would guess that one of the things that might happen here is you might end up with nothing left on the table, and you may have to go at it in a different way. Claire?
Well, I mean, that is a possibility, and I just want to be careful with our language. We're not going forward with any of these sites. We're just looking more deeply at them. So I think if we did start with just the 5 now, and if that fatal flaw analysis kicked more off, maybe we could then go back to the fuller list and bring a couple more forward to look at to have those options still.
George?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I think that could be part of what they're going to do already. So I mean, if something's really glaring, we'll bring that forward and tell us about it. And really, you know, that's right. You're right, Councilor Surratt. We're just looking at sites, and we've kind of boiled it down to these 6, but that doesn't necessarily preclude other sites from being analyzed. We now have the list. We only got this like, you know, an hour and a half ago. So we haven't had time really to look at it, and I think they've done a wonderful job of eliminating, you know, some pretty obvious, you know, places that just won't work, but they didn't include city parks, and there were other properties that weren't included, and we councilors can look at this list and sift through it ourselves, think about perhaps an unutilized park somewhere, even though we asked for that not to be on the list. There may be other places that we might discover that aren't on this list that could be analyzed later. We can bring that forward later. This is, you know, these 6 sites aren't necessarily set in stone. So I think it's a good starting point. And I would really think it's really important to have somebody from Opportunity Village be on that panel, and I would suggest the chair, Dan Bryant. It would be a logical choice for me. They could pick whoever they wanted to, but I think that they need to be part of that discussion. And then just one other thing, one final thing. I have been in communication with Human Services Department in the city of Seattle last Friday, and I forwarded some documents to the council and mayor and the city attorney and to you, Michael. And I'm just wondering, did everyone get those? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the reason I sent those, the first is kind of a history of the tent cities, written by a city staffer. Al Poole is a city of Seattle employee, and then kind of an analysis and describes the city's relationship with the service provider. There's a consent decree, which was foisted on the city. Foisted, that's the wrong word, which was, you know, the city had to undergo 10 years ago because they were of some improper things they were doing to the service provider in one of the host churches. That was decided against the city by the Superior Court of King County. That expires in another month. So last year, the city council sent the third document, created the third document that I sent, which is an ordinance that continues the requirements of the consent decree. And it's not just on the city, it's on the service provider too. They have to meet certain standards. So I just wanted to make sure everybody got those. I think they can really help inform our discussion as we move along.
So, sir, do you have enough information is there enough clarity about what council wants for the next round?
Yeah, I think we'll move forward with is more detailed analysis on the 5 sites, kind of a little bit of fatal flaw and a lot more. And then we'll look for another work session time. I think we'll send out some of that information earlier by memo so you have it. You can start evaluating it, and we'll find a time to do that. Otherwise, we'll continue to work on getting a panel together.
All right.
Madam Mayor, I did have a question, but it was usurped, so.
Oh, you okay? I'm sorry.
I'm going to have to be.
Okay. Sorry about that, Pat. All right. Thank you.
Claire.